She was the first Queen of England to be crowned monarch in her own right, and as such, the coronation of Mary I was a landmark moment in the country's history. But what do we know about what happened that day and in the days leading up to it? Where and when was the coronation held? What role did the Queen's sister, the future Elizabeth I, play in proceedings? And what was their former stepmother, Anne of Cleves, doing there? How were the festivities adapted to take Mary's gender into account? What did she wear? What crown was used on her? And how did this staunchly Catholic monarch navigate her coronation in what was an increasingly non-Catholic country? This is History Calling, where I bring you new videos every week on all aspects of the past, and the answers are coming up. If you love history and want more, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel with the notification bell switched on so that YouTube lets you know when I upload. You can also switch on the subtitles for my videos if you like, using the CC, short for closed captions button, as shown here, and even translate them into a language of your choice using the little gear icon next to it. For more from me, check out the links to my social media and Patreon page in the description box below. Mary I had had a difficult journey to the throne. Born a Princess of England and heiress presumptive in 1516, she was the only one of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon's children to survive infancy, and until the late 1520s she looked set to succeed to her father's crown when the time came. That all changed, however, when Henry fell in love with Anne Boleyn. He abandoned Catherine on the basis that she had previously been married to his long-dead brother, Prince Arthur, had Mary declared illegitimate, and when the girl refused to recognise the new queen or the legitimacy of her much younger half-sister, Princess Elizabeth, born in 1533, Henry put her through a long campaign of mistreatment and humiliation to try to break her spirit. If you see my video on her early life, linked on screen and below for you, you can hear all about the miseries she endured. The tide only turned in 1536 when Anne fell from favour and was executed, and Elizabeth was in turn declared illegitimate too. Mary and Henry made up. Catherine was by now dead, so there was no obstacle there, and Mary was even godmother to her half-brother, Prince Edward, born in 1537 to Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, who died just days later. Edward's birth made it much less likely that Mary would ever be queen. But as Henry had no male spare, he did eventually restore his two daughters to the line of succession after Edward, through the 1543 Act of Succession. The king died in January 1547, and Edward duly succeeded at the age of 9. He and Mary were religious opposites, though. He a fervent Protestant, she a devout Catholic, and his 6-year reign pushed her to the brink of abandoning England and fleeing to her mother's Spanish family for refuge. She stuck it out though, and as her brother's health deteriorated in 1552 and 1553, she would have expected the throne to be hers before long. Edward, though, had other ideas. Appalled at the thought of a Catholic queen who would undo all his efforts to complete the Protestant Reformation in England, which his father had started, and dubious about the legitimacy of both his sisters, given their father's marital exploits, he attempted to circumvent the Act of Succession and leave the crown to his 15-year-old Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey. There was a serious attempt by Jane's supporters to usurp the crown on her behalf in July 1553, just after Edward's death, but in barely a week and a half, Mary had raised enough support to see off her rival and had secured the throne. Again, I've linked a video for you on this part of her life which goes through these events in much greater detail below. With the succession issue now settled, attention could turn to the new queen's coronation. This coronation would be unique in post-conquest English royal history, as no woman had ever successfully held the throne in her own right, though Empress Matilda had come very close in the 12th century only to fail at the last moment. See my video on her for more details. Mary's gender meant that certain ceremonies would have to be adapted, but in most instances, things stayed the same. Coronations were held much sooner after a monarch's succession in 16th century England than they would be today, and Mary's was no exception, with the date chosen being the 1st of October 1553. There were a number of preliminary ceremonies to be gone through before the main event though, and so we're going to pick up the story on the 27th of September, when the Queen travelled by water from St James's Palace to the Tower of London with her 20-year-old sister Elizabeth, arriving to a gun salute. It was a long-standing tradition that the monarchs stay in the Tower, which was primarily intended as a royal palace in this era rather than a prison, before their coronation, and so Mary was following convention in doing so. Soon though, she would have to break with tradition, when, on the 30th of September, one of the most famous coronation rituals took place within the Tower, the creation of new Knights of the Bath, which was not a chivalric order at this point, by the way. This caused problems for Mary. As the name suggests, the knights, all men of course, had to get naked and have a bath in front of their monarch in order to be inducted into this prestigious group. But now that the monarch was a queen, that just wasn't on. Had she been married, no doubt she would have had her husband perform this task, but as she was still single at this point, Mary instead delegated her powers to Henry FitzAlan, 12th Earl of Arundel, who was her Lord Steward, and he acted in her stead, creating the 15 new knights for her. That same day, Mary moved from the Tower to the Palace of Whitehall in a massive procession through London. She travelled in a chariot drawn by 6 horses, with a canopy above her head, and wore a gown of blue velvet trimmed with fur. On her head was a crown of gold, studded with so many gemstones that one source says she was fain to bear up her head with her hands. All around her were England's statesmen, councillors, bishops, the new Knights of the Bath, and behind the Queen in another chariot, richly decked out in cloth of silver, sat her sister and heiress Elizabeth and their former stepmother Anne of Cleves. Anne had been given the title of the King's sister after the annulment of her marriage to Henry VIII back in 1540, and as this made her the 3rd person in the kingdom after Mary and Elizabeth, her presence at the coronation really was unsurprising. Behind them rode 46 noblewomen who were dressed in red velvet, as were their horses, red being the colour of nobility, of course. Then there were other women in chariots who were presumably felt to be too infirm or too high-ranking to ride on horseback. According to a man named Simon Reynard, who wrote a description of the day's festivities to his master, Mary's cousin and future husband, Prince Philip of Spain, the streets were hung with tapestries and strewn with grass and flowers, and many triumphal arches were erected along her way. Another source, this time a chronicle written by an English merchant tailor called Henry Matchin, who was then living in London, described the series of pageants which were put on by the citizens to entertain their new queen. He recalled that there was, quote, "at Fenchurch a goodly pageant, with 4 great giants and with goodly speeches. The Genoese made it. At Grace Church another goodly pageant of Easterlings making, and at Leadenhall was another pageant hanged with cloth of gold, and the goodliest playing with all manner of musicians. And there was one blowing of a trumpet all the day long. At the Conduit in Cornhill another of the Seat, and at the Great Conduit another goodly one, and the standard painted and gilded, and the cross painted. And at the Little Conduit a goodly pageant. In Paul's churchyard 2 pageants, and 2 scaffolds on Paul's steeple with streamers, and Ludgate painted, at the Conduit in Fleet Street a goodly pageant." Other sources describe the many children and adults who sang to and saluted the new queen, and give more detail as to the decorations described by Matchin. One anonymous chronicler, for instance, explained exactly what had happened at Gracechurch Street, where he said, "There was another pageant made by the Florentines, very high, on the top whereof there stood 4 pictures, and on the side of them, on the highest top, there stood an angel clothed in green, with a trumpet in his hand. And he was made with such a device that when the trumpeter, who stood secretly in the pageant, did blow his trumpet, the angel did put his trumpet to his mouth, as though it should be he that blew the same, to the marvelling of many ignorant persons." It was spectacular, but it was all just the warm-up. With the initial ceremonies done, the next day came the main event. On the 1st of October, Mary awoke early, who knows if she'd even had much sleep, And according to one anonymous chronicler, she travelled by water to the Old Palace, meaning the Old Palace of Westminster. At about 10 or 11 a.m, different sources give slightly different details, she set off for Westminster Abbey on foot. For as you can see from this modern footage, the Abbey and the current Palace of Westminster, which is on the same side as the Tudor Palace, are basically next door to one another. Led by a group of bishops and accompanied by the nobles of her realm, she walked on a railed walkway covered with blue cloth, no red carpets just yet, and wore another gown of blue to match, with the same golden circlet on her head she'd sported the day before. Antonio de Garras, a Spanish merchant then living in London, wrote a detailed account of what happened next, which was completed less than 6 months later on the 23rd of March 1554 and published in Medina del Campo, which is a town in Spain. He says that upon reaching the abbey, quote, "Her Majesty ascended upon a great platform, so high that it was mounted by 20 steps, and upon this another smaller one with 10 steps to the chair where she seated herself. And immediately rising, she was conducted by the Bishop of Winchester, Lord High Chancellor, round all 4 sides of the platform, that all the people might see her. Which bishop said in a loud voice, to be heard of all, 'Is this the true heir to the kingdom?' And all the people shouted joyfully, 'Yea.' He continued, 'Are you willing to receive her as your queen and mistress?' They answered, 'Yea, yea.' After which her Majesty went to the altar to hear the sermon, which being finished, she prostrated herself on the ground and received benediction with many prayers, and then entered into a retired apartment and divested herself of her mantle of crimson velvet lined with ermine, and returned to the altar in her corset and prostrated herself anew. And continuing thus, the litanies were sung, the robes which she was about to assume having been blessed, and then the unction began, and her breast, shoulders, forehead, and temples were anointed. She was next clad in a rochet of white taffeta, and spurs were put upon her feet, and she was girt with a sword, as when one is armed a knight. And a king's sceptre was placed in one hand, and in the other the sceptre wont to be given to queens, which is surmounted by a dove. And finally they gave her a great orb of gold, and crowned her with 3 crowns, one for England, one for France, and one for Ireland. And then she was arrayed in a crimson mantle different from the first, though of the same velvet, and likewise trimmed with ermine. And thus attired, she seated herself again on the throne above mentioned, where all the nobles of the kingdom came in order of their rank to do her homage, Her Majesty continually holding the 2 aforesaid royal sceptres. And then she commanded that all prisoners should be set at liberty, those in the Tower excepted, so no reprieve for Lady Jane Grey, and bestowed a general pardon on all who had offended her. Next after this, the Bishop of Winchester said Mass with much solemnity, the Queen kneeling throughout with great devotion and great tokens of religion, which being ended, she entered the aforesaid retired apartment, and speedily came forth with the orb in her hand and the royal sceptre, clad in a mantle of purple velvet furred with tufts of ermine, and with the round cap as monarchs are wont to wear. In this manner she went forth from the church, attended by the princes and ambassadors. There are a few points in de Garras's account upon which I'd like to elaborate for you. The first is the acclamation of Mary after she arrived at the Abbey, when she was proclaimed and accepted by the onlookers as Queen. In many other cases, this was a mere formality, but in Mary's case, as a monarch who had almost been usurped, I wonder if it didn't carry a little extra weight for her. Second are the crowns used. Though we aren't given details on these, I think it's a safe bet that one of them was the medieval St. Edward's crown, later destroyed by the parliamentarians in the 17th century, with a replacement made at the time of the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. See my video on the coronation crown to learn more about it. Leading on from this, we have the crown jewels used. Now, we don't have a coronation portrait of Mary, but we do have one of her sister Elizabeth, and again, I think it's a good bet that the orb and sceptre you see her holding were the same ones used by Mary. Her crown, which isn't St. Edward's crown, was also very possibly the one worn by her older sibling too. The fourth issue regards the throne used. This was likely St. Edward's chair, which you see here, still in Westminster Abbey, where it is always kept, and which has been used by nearly all English monarchs since its creation at the start of the 14th century, making it one of the few items left today that predates the Cromwellian destruction of the royal regalia, and which provides us with a material link to the Tudors' coronations. The coronation had taken the better part of the day to complete, and it was 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, different sources give different times again, when Mary finally left the Abbey. The festivities weren't over yet, however. Next up was the coronation banquet. This took place just across the street in Westminster Hall, and again I'm going to use Antonio de Garris's account of how the evening unfolded, as it's the most detailed, and I haven't read anything in any of the other less detailed sources to suggest that his information was incorrect. I don't have any images of Mary's banquet, but I will show you images from others to give you some idea of the spectacle. De Garris wrote that when Her Majesty arrived in the hall, the Earl of Arundel was there, mace in hand, as Lord Constable of the Kingdom, appointed to that office for one day only, and the Duke of Norfolk as High Marshal, both on coursers, which is a type of horse, trapped with cloth of gold, who rode continually round and round the hall, as is the custom at royal coronations in this country. And in the middle of the banquet, a horseman entered, armed cap a pie, meaning head to foot, in bright armour, with a surcoat of armorial bearings, and the housings of his steed all gold and crimson, and read out a challenge thus: Whosoever shall dare to affirm that this lady is not the rightful queen of this kingdom, I will show him the contrary, or will do him to death. And casting down his glove, he rode all round the hall, and returned before the queen, and proclaimed with a loud voice that, seeing that none was found who dared to gainsay him or take up his glove, he hailed her as the true and rightful queen of that kingdom. Her Majesty, thanking him as her knight and defender, gave him the golden cup from which she drank, filled with wine, that he might drink and carry it away. After this ceremony, which is the custom in the realm of England at the coronation of every king, the ambassadors came to kiss Her Majesty's hands and congratulate her upon her coronation, who, for her magnificence and manifest great virtues, deserves to be compared with the greatest queens who have been to this present, and I know for certain that more than 100,000 ducats were dispersed in this coronation at Her Majesty's expense. As good as he is, there are a few points de Garris doesn't mention, but which I'd like to discuss. The first comes from Simon Reynard's account, which is largely in sync with de Garris's, but which includes this description of Mary's seating arrangements at the banquet. The Queen sat on a stone chair covered with brocade, which they say was carried off from Scotland in sign of a victory and was once used by the kings of Scotland at their crowning. She rested her feet upon 2 of her ladies, which is also a part of the prescribed ceremonial, and ate thus. He's speaking, of course, about the famous stone of Scone, and yes, I know there are various ways of pronouncing it, but I'm going with Scone. This was indeed taken by the English in 1296, and the coronation chair was actually built in around 1300 to house it. The Stone of Destiny, as it is also known, was only returned to Scotland in 1996, with the proviso that it be loaned back to England for all future coronations. Nowadays, I'm happy to report it is treated with much more care and respect than it was on the day when Mary Tudor parked her behind on it for dinner, and so too are members of the royal household, who I don't believe are used as footstools anymore. If you'd like to learn more about the Scottish crown jewels, which the stone is now displayed with, and which are much older than the current English suite, see my video on them. The other thing not alluded to by de Garris was the presence of Elizabeth or Anne of Cleves in all of this, but other sources did mention them being at the banquet. Henry Matchin, for instance, tells us that at the end of the table dined my Lady Elizabeth and my Lady Anne of Cleves. I assume that they had been at the Abbey too, though I haven't read a source which specifically mentions their presence there. It was to be Anne's last great public appearance, for she died in 1557 in Chelsea Manor in London. But Elizabeth, as we know, still had a long and glittering career ahead of her, once she'd survived her sister's reign, of course. I'll leave my Tudor monarchs and my 6 wives of Henry VIII playlists linked below for you if you'd like to know more about these women's lives and deaths. So Mary had made it to the throne, literally, and with her coronation done, her reign could begin in earnest. Sadly, it didn't go as she had planned, but if you want to know what happened to her in her final years, from her marriage to Philip of Spain, to her pseudo-pregnancies, problems with Elizabeth, decision to allow the burning of nearly 300 Protestants at the stake, and ultimate death, see my videos on her later life and on her last will and testament. That's all from me for today, but thank you as always to my wonderful patrons and to those of you who support the channel using the thanks button underneath videos for your continuing kindness and generosity. Let me know in the comments below which part of Mary's coronation festivities you wish you could see the most. I'll be back next week with another video, and until then, keep learning.